do you think there is enough support there for artists and mental health on all levels? How do you approach writing a track when you were given the vocals first? Do you think that listening to artists that blow your mind and are so far ahead of yourself, meaning me, that it can damage your confidence and stall your progression? My default channel volumes are set to -10 dB, but I always find myself having to crank up the Audient ID22. I am split between purchasing Mixbus 32C and Pro Tools subscription. Hey guys, welcome to the Kane audio vlog. It is Friday, it's time for another Ask Me Anything. Usual rules apply. Comment anything you want below this video and I'll get back to you in next week's video. Before I look at last week's video, there's a couple of little things in house admin. But before I even get to house admin, I want to say my heartfelt condolences to the friends and family of Garrett, otherwise known as I.O., who was another Mousetrap artist. A very sad loss, a very young age. Honestly, I don't know what else to say, but it is very sad news, and obviously my condolences to him and his family. And I just want to get that out there first because I understand there is a comment that asks a question tied to that. And so, I mean, I would have said that anyway, but I also don't want that comment to come in as a complete shock. House admin wise, again, there's not much to say in house admin, if I'm honest, other than a huge thank you to the new Patreon subscribers and all Patreon subscribers, to be honest. But every little does genuinely help, especially in this day and age. And putting out this content every week is not the easiest thing to do. So I just want to say thanks to those of you who do subscribe to my Patreon account. Anyone who wants to, there'll be a link below this video. There always is. I think that's that for house admin. I don't think there's anything else to cover at this point. As for just general updates, what I've been up to this week, I've been making music. I mean, sounds weird for a music producer, but do you know what? It's kind of odd that as a full-time music producer, very little music production gets done, or it feels like it. I mean, obviously I do a lot of music production, but sometimes it feels like I do more admin and research and learning and development and stuff like that. It feels like I do far more of that than actual just writing music. But hey, that's life. So let's have a look at last week's video. Starting at the top. Eslin, thanks for the recommendation. I've never looked into Brainworks plugins before, but from what I can see, it looks like they've got some great analog emulation plugins. They have, honestly. So the guy that started and runs Brainworks, Dirk Ulrich, lovely guy and genius coder. Honestly, I couldn't recommend Brainworks enough in terms of plugin makers. Pretty much everything they've ever done has just been gold for me. Whether it be the synths or the channel strips or the mastering tools, every single one of them has just been worth their weight in gold. You're welcome. Moving on, Jamie Valance Music. Hi Dom. With the unfortunate passing away of Garrett I.O., it begs the question, do you think there is enough support there for artists and mental health on all levels? It's a tricky one. So Jamie goes on, I know that it is a taxing job, but do you think labels should have to have avenues to allow artists to have access to if they are struggling? Sorry for the deep question, but it's hit me hard and I'd understand not being able to answer it. I think these things need to be discussed. I think mental health issues need to be discussed. I think the more they are discussed and the more they are normalised, the more we should all be able to accept ways of moving forward, or ways of coping, dealing, moving, whatever the case is. Do I think that comes down to the labels? If I'm honest, no. At the end of the day, a record label is a business who is dealing purely with copyrights. It just so happens that those copyrights come from creative, artistic people. But if I'm truly honest, I don't think a record label itself, on paper, needs to be involved to any huge extent. And I think you'll probably find the vast majority of record labels, I wouldn't say don't care about their artists. Of course they care about their artists, but I don't think they're in a position to offer these things. I think it's a very difficult situation, and I think it's different for different people, and that's probably what makes it so complicated. I think perhaps statistically speaking, artistic people are more susceptible to suffering from certain mental health issues. So I think that businesses around this sector maybe need to be more considerate of how they do things. But I'm not sure that the onus or responsibility should fall on any single one of the people involved. I think I kind of feel like I'm avoiding answering it, but I'm not. I'm genuinely. I just don't think it's as clear cut as that. The first part of your question: do I think there's enough support? No, 100% not. There isn't enough mental health support in the world for anybody. It does not matter whether you are a budding hobbyist music producer or a rich and famous megastar. At the end of the day, you are still human. It doesn't matter whether you are an admin assistant for a record label or the CEO of a multinational. You're still human, and you still are susceptible and open to all of these things that life can throw at us. That doesn't make things any easier, but it does mean that we are at some level all equal. And I think it pays dividends to remember that sometimes. It is, like I say, it's a really, really tricky situation. And I know that in the electronic music industry, it's almost amplified by the nature of our jobs, where I know, for example, at the peak of my DJing career, I barely saw daylight for a lot of the tours, because I would be working until 5-6 o'clock in the morning, partying, then going to after parties or whatever, and then getting back to a hotel and just sleeping all day, and then quickly going on an aeroplane and off to the next one. And things like that can be hugely impacting on your mental health. So I think, with that in mind, I think it would be good for record labels to maybe help unify in some way, perhaps form some sort of collective for at least raising awareness of potential issues. But I think that has to come out voluntarily. I don't, I don't know. I've got to be honest. I've not given it enough thought, clearly, because I don't know what I'm saying here. But yeah, look, yes, the job is taxing, but I think, you know what, I think being self-employed in general is pretty taxing, because, you know, in fact, as I explained at the beginning of this video, you know, I've been doing a lot of admin stuff, and you know, that's not what I signed up for. That's not, I don't remember being a 12-year-old boy dreaming of producing music and using all these cool gadgets and doing some admin and responding to loads of emails, and you know, that wasn't part of the dream. Responding to emails and waiting for conference calls and signing annoying NDA contracts and, you know, all of these sorts of things. That's not part of the dream, is it? So it you know, but I think that's true for anyone that's self-employed. I don't think anyone really starts their own business with a dream of doing all the rubbish work. So I'm sort of hesitant to it's weird, because I know I am a music producer and I know I am in the music industry, but I'm kind of hesitant to say that our job is any more or less taxing than anybody else's, because which is why I'm sort of trying to explain that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what our job is. We are all still human and we are all still susceptible. So I think it's something that needs to be discussed more openly, particularly amongst men, dare I say it. I think traditionally men have been told to shut up and put up, and that's just not the way to do it, is it? So I think you know, I think anybody and anyone who's watching these videos, in fact, one thing I do want to say is I will drop a link below in this video, but there is a UK charity called Calm who deal with mental health for men, and so I think they are worth getting in touch if you are ever having any problems whatsoever. There is help out there, and honestly there is. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's a friend, a colleague, a company, an organization, or whatever the case. There is help out there. You just have to find it. You've got to know where to look, I suppose, and that's the tricky bit. Sorry for the deep question, but it's hit me hard, and I'd understand not being able to answer it. Hopefully I've answered it as best as I can. You know, I think deep questions are important, and I think we need to, like I say, we need to discuss these things in the music industry, and particularly in our gender. Yeah, there we go. I don't know if there's anything else I can say on the matter. So, moving on. Capital Sin. Hi, Dom. Thank you for taking the time to answer. I'm so glad I asked the question, because what you mentioned is exactly what I was looking for. My question for this... I don't know what I answered, but you're welcome. My question for this week has to do with vocals. I recently got my hands on a decent vocal, and I would like to create a track around it. I'll lean in for this one. So far, I have been able to create some cool chords, pads, harps, etc. that sound great by themselves, but not that great with the actual vocals. I usually add vocals to my tracks at a later state if I get lucky and find one that works. This time I'm starting with vocals first, and I'm a little stuck. How do you approach writing a track when you are given the vocals first? Also, Inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator, Tim Urban, is a great video. You should watch it. Do you know what? I didn't. I probably got carried away procrastinating. Cheers. So, the question really is, how do you approach writing a track when you are given the vocals first? That's a good question, and one I'm not entirely sure I know the answer to. I think it's about finding rhythm is one thing, because recording a good vocal is about finding the rhythm, isn't it? it is for me when I'm in a session with a vocalist and we're sort of just throwing ideas out. A lot of it comes down to the rhythm of the vocal at the beginning, more so than the melody, because the melody you can change later, but the rhythm is much more difficult to change. So I guess that's first and foremost is think about the rhythm of the vocal and maybe develop some notation or pad rhythms that work with the tempo, with the rhythm of the vocal. I guess then from there you'd work out a chord phrase, and then from there maybe a melody to underscore it, basically. And you're kind of working backwards with everything then. I agree that for me, I prefer to write the music first and then have a vocal on top. But the other thing to be careful of is when dealing with vocals in general, especially when you're writing stuff. Personally, if I was given just a vocal on its own, I would start with just a basic grand piano and develop your melody, your pads, your chords, and any bass line or whatever, any melody I would do just purely on grand piano to begin with and sort of take it from there. The reason for that is because again, depending on the vocalist, it'll be within a certain range. If it's a female vocal, it'll be slightly higher than the average male vocal, and because of that, you're dealing with certain ranges that in a mix certain things may or may not work. So let's say, for example, you have an average low mid range male vocal, then you kind of need to be really careful with low mid range synths. Similarly, if you have a mid high range female vocal, then you need to be careful what instruments you're putting in there as well, because you could put some high strings that sit nicely on top in the frequency range, or you could put some low bass or some deep pads, and all of that kind of fills out that space above and below the vocal. But if you want to throw some big noisy, high mid synths on top of a female vocal, then you got to be really careful, because more often than not it just doesn't work, because they're competing for space. So I think that's probably my advice for starting off, is if you've just got a vocal, just play with some chords, some notation, just fiddle with the rhythm of things first, obviously in key, and then find the rhythm of your bass line, which will really dictate the rhythm of everything else, like your drums and whatever. And yeah, I would start with just grand piano and just work your way in developing, whether it be verse or chorus or bridge or whatever it is you're doing. All of this depends on what kind of a vocal it is, of course, but personally I would start with something basic like a piano and just develop your song structure and perhaps your arrangement using just a piano, and then once you're happy with that, then throw in maybe some drums and a bass line and give it the rhythm, solidify the rhythm that you've hopefully already given it, I suppose. And then once you've done that, then you can start looking at maybe replacing the grand piano with whatever synths you want, just being aware that certain frequency ranges have already been used up by the vocal, and you kind of want to avoid clashing with them. I think hopefully that helps. Moving on, Open Minds. Hi Dom, first of all, I hope this message reaches you. I've had a couple of weeks where I've put stuff up, but I don't think you've got them. Okay, I apologise for that. Sometimes things go to spam, and I'll be honest, I don't check the spam comments. And there's no rhyme or reason as to why some of these things go to spam, so I have no idea. No problem at all, though. I'm sorry to hear that you're thinking of giving the AMAs a break. I've learnt a lot from your videos in general and would be ashamed to see it come to an end, although I understand your position. I've been in the background every week but haven't commented, so we'll pull my finger out. Question for you. I've been a person that has always played around with music and haven't really tried to come up with something serious. And to be honest with you, I don't think I'm good enough. Do you think that listening to artists that blow your mind and are so far ahead of yourself, meaning me, that it can damage your confidence and stall your progression? That's a good question. And yes and no. I think so. Essentially what you're asking is, do you think that listening to artists that blow your mind is a good or bad thing? So I guess I completely feel your pain. There are some artists that I have listened to in the past where I've then tried maybe writing something similar, or I've loved that sound or that style and I've done something of a similar nature, and then I listen to one of their tracks again and I'm like, oh, I should give up right now because I'm nowhere near as good as this person. But actually, you know what? The reason that person is the best sounding at that thing is because that's their thing. The person who most looks like you is you, and I can't stress that enough. And I think this is hugely important for anyone who wants to learn. I've always recommended, look, if you want to copy other artists and sound like other artists for the sake of learning how they do things or what works, what doesn't work, great, crack on, do it. I would never take anything away from that. But if you want to start making your own music seriously, you need to sound almost like nobody else. And that's not, I always have to also remind people that don't take that too far. So, nobody is asking you to suddenly just make this crazy experimental weird shit just because it doesn't sound like anybody else. At the end of the day, no matter what you do, someone will always go, hey, that sounds like insert artist here. Because that's what we do. We recognize patterns. That's what we do as humans. It's just human nature. We recognize patterns and we recognize similarities and whatever. But I think nobody can be a better you than you, and that's really the point I'm trying to make. So, and I've always used Skrillex as an example in this sort of case, where if you try to make bass lines like Skrillex and you're using Skrillex's techniques, you will only ever be second best to Skrillex. The best you can ever be is second best to Skrillex. Now, that's not a bad thing, being second best to Skrillex. But if you want to be the best at something, then that something needs to be yours, not somebody else's. So I don't know if that helps or not, but I guess if you're doing your thing, then hopefully listening to other artists that blow your mind in a different thing, that thing isn't the same thing. So I guess using Skrillex again, if I listen to a Skrillex bass line, it blows my mind. A lot of Skrillex's early work, certainly at the time, blew my mind, because I'd constantly go, how has he just got this thing that's just so loud and so obnoxious and so in your face? How is it that big? And I wouldn't even know where to begin, but I don't make that sound, so I like to be able to appreciate it from a distance. And I know I've mentioned before in some of these AMAs that I actually listen to mostly sort of reggae or ambient stuff. I don't listen to much house or techno, even though that's kind of what I'm known for creating. I don't listen to that much of anybody else's. I know people have compared my work to people like Stefan Bodzin. I don't listen to much Stefan Bodzin, and I guess, listening to great artists in your field is going to make you feel a bit rubbish. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to say don't listen to great artists, because we want to be able to listen to great artists. So it's kind of a yes and kind of a no. I can see my camera's about to stop as well, so I'm just going to... Too late. Look, it's a tricky one, because as a music producer, I would say don't listen to other artists. But as a music fan, I'd say, yeah, listen to other artists. So I guess the trick is don't compare your music to theirs. If you're comparing your music to somebody else's, it's never going to go well for you, for anyone, I think that's just the way it goes. But like I say, Skrillex is the best Skrillex. If you're trying to sound like Skrillex, then the best you can ever be is second best. So I think that's something worth bearing in mind. So I don't know. I can see you've written more than this. I listen to a lot of Mousetrap artists, including yourself, but the main one being Eddie currently, and I think his productions are incredible. They are, and unachievable for myself. I don't think anything is unachievable when it comes to writing music. But I think Eddie's another example. Eddie has his own sound. It sounds like Eddie music, and so I guess the best advice is try and do something different. Try and do something that doesn't sound like Eddie, because if you're putting yourself in a position where you can compare your music to his, then you need to maybe just sidestep into a slightly different direction. I'm not saying all of a sudden start doing drum and bass or something silly like that. Stay within that genre, but try and, I don't know, if the producer you love is using really clean tones, maybe try and throw some distorted sounds in there and see where it takes you. And that way it kind of just throws you off mentally. You put yourself in a position where you're not going to compare your music to other people's. I suppose that's kind of the advice I'm trying to give. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't say I stopped listening to house and techno, but I pretty much stopped listening to house and techno years ago, because I didn't want to be too heavily influenced. I didn't want to be going, I want to make this stuff now. I want to make this stuff now, because I do find myself getting, I'm going to call it inspired, but let's be honest, you want to just steal other people's work. You just want to, you hear a sound you like, you want to make that sound. I mean it in a complimentary way. But because of that, I kind of had to switch off to an extent, I suppose. So there we go. All the best, James, unknown artist. You're welcome. John Bloomfield. So last but not least, John Bloomfield. Hey Dom, Urban, high five. I am a Bitwig user and my default channel volumes are set to -10 dB, but I always find myself having to crank up the Audient ID22 really high to get any decent volume when writing. Do you have the same issue, or any tips on the best way to set up channels, master, etc. during the writing phase? Also, I'm split between purchasing a... Right, let's start with the first one. I am also a Bitwig user, and I am also an ID22 user, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Look, at the end of the day, if you're setting all your channels to -10 dB, as I do, and I recommend, then your master channel is going to be 10 dB quieter than otherwise. So there kind of isn't and there kind of is. What I find myself doing sometimes is I'll just throw in a limiter or something like an L1, and I'll leave it as default, but set the threshold to -10 dB or -8 dB or something, just so it basically raises the gain by about 8 dB. But if something comes in way too loud, it's going to limit it as well. You just need to be aware of that when you are moving on with the production and you're happy with it, get rid of it and take it off your master channel before you move on to your mix down or whatever. And every now and then you need to just double check that you're not smashing any levels, because you might find, I always tell people, don't put anything in your master channel when you're writing, and I mean it as well. You shouldn't have anything in your master channel. Generally speaking, I won't have anything in my master channel, but there are the odd track that I'll write, and I'll just throw in an L1 limiter, and I'll set the threshold to, I'm saying minus 10 dB. I don't actually know. I just bring it down until the output is nearing 0 dB. Looking about minus 3 dB, something like that. So the limiter's not even limiting. It's not active. It's kind of just basically raising the volume, but also catching any spikes if there are any, because the last thing you want is something, one of your channels accidentally going up to 0 dB while you're playing everything loud, and being 10 dB louder than anything else in your project, because you might end up blowing a speaker or an eardrum, and they're probably not fun. So that's kind of my advice. Other than that, don't worry about it. So for the most part, I don't tend to put anything in my master channel, because I tend to silence everything else on my computer anyway, so I'm not expecting huge pings or bleeps or notifications or anything like that. So I just tend to have my Audient cranked up 10 dB louder than I would otherwise. I don't find it too much of a problem. But if you do find it a problem, and if you're getting annoying pings on other apps or whatever, then chuck in a limiter and just bring the threshold down until the output is kind of nearing 0, but just don't let it touch 0. Don't let the limiter do any real work, basically, because that's going to throw you later on when it comes to the mix down and whatever. You might find that, and you have to keep checking it every now and then. Just look to make sure it's not doing any work, because you might have accidentally left your sub bass on plus 20 dB or whatever, and you'll find you get to a point where everything sounds amazing, and then you check your master and you see everything's red and the gain reduction's 20 dB or whatever, and in which case, what you're hearing and what you're seeing might be two very different things. Also, I am split between purchasing Mixbus 32C and Pro Tools subscription for doing mixdown / mastering. I know you are a Mixbus fan, but you have also used Pro Tools in the past. The biggest draw towards Mixbus is the price at the moment. What else should I be aware of? Cheers. Keep up the good work with the videos. Thank you very much. So personally, I would say 100% Mixbus 32C and negative 100% Pro Tools. I will fully admit that Pro Tools is far more established. I will fully admit that Pro Tools is probably far more capable of certain tasks, if you're looking at film score and sync stuff, but I always had issues with Avid and their customer services and the way they ran their business, and it just didn't work for me, because I did mixing and mastering and whatever using Pro Tools. I can't remember which. I think I left on version 12, something like that. But every upgrade from, I can't remember where I started, probably version 5 or 6, all the way up to version 12. Every time I upgraded, there were just huge issues, whether it be financial. I just suddenly had to pay full price for something that I really shouldn't have been paying. I should have paid an upgrade fee, but they demanded full price or whatever. There were silly things that were happening, and it got to a point where I think it was version 12, they had made clear that they were never going to charge for a minor update, and version 12 point whatever I left was full of bugs, to the point where I had to attempt exporting. Probably 9 out of 10 times it would fail exporting whatever I was working on. And then they released a fix for that, and you had to pay full price. It baffled me. So as far as I'm concerned, I get that it's a subscription now, but as far as I'm concerned, that was enough to put me off Pro Tools for life. So I do everything I can to avoid using Pro Tools. On the flip side, Mixbus, bang for buck, you cannot go wrong. I'm a huge fan of Harrison as a company. I'm a huge fan of their analog desks. I'm a huge fan of the 32C sound. It is the only workstation. I know people have always had battles of, Ableton sounds better than Logic or whatever. That's rubbish. They don't sound better than the other. It's just that, other than the panning law, there is nothing different. However, Mixbus 32C does indeed have its own sound and character, and the built-in devices, whether it be the saturation drive or the available EQs, are just beautiful. So I love mixing on 32C, and because it's a workstation that I've never learnt to do any sound design work or writing work on, for me, separating the job, so I write all my stuff in Bitwig, which is all the creative, nice, juicy, flowy stuff. Then I can, when I'm happy with that, I can export it as stems and import that into 32C, where I'm just dealing with mixing. And to be quite honest, I really enjoy mixing in 32C. It makes it a pleasure. So yeah, I highly recommend Harrison Mixbus 32C. And that, my friends, is it for this week. If you've made it this far into the video, then comment. The dog's out. It wouldn't be an AMA, would it, without that dog barking somewhere in the background. If you've made it this far into the video, comment the word magic, because I'm seeing a video recommended here saying magic is in the mid-range, a mixed tutorial by Colt Caparoon, who I have never seen before. So there we go. Comment the word magic, you get a high five in next week's video. That is it. I hope everyone has a good weekend and a good week, and I'll see you same time next week. Cheers.